Today, I'm going to be talking about 10 Days the Flesh by Augustina Bastarrica. I'm going to break this analysis into 4 sections, and this is not a summary of the book, but rather an exploration of its key ideas and themes. Okay, so this novel follows our protagonist, Marcos, who works as the right-hand man at a processing plant. His position places him at the center of the system, forcing him to confront its reality up close, while the rest of society remains distant from what actually happens. Marcos is a contradictory figure. He does not openly resist the system, yet he is clearly uncomfortable within it. And this tension shapes much of his character through the story. Alongside this, the novel also touches on grief, as he's dealing with the loss of his child, which adds another layer to his emotional state as the story unfolds. When they announced the existence of the virus known as the GGB, there was mass hysteria and widespread fear. They tried vaccines, antidotes, but the virus mutated and resisted, and there was no cure found. People believed that even a scratch from an animal could be fatal. It is strongly implied that the first victims were people on the margins of society, such as prisoners, the poor, migrants, and really those without protection. During the transition phase, secret killings and consumption of human beings began to appear. One of the first public cases involved 2 unemployed Bolivians who were attacked and barbecued by a group of neighbors. While this was initially seen as scandalous, it gradually introduced the idea that meat is meat regardless of where it comes from. From there, violence spread worldwide. In some places, marginalized groups began disappearing entirely. At the same time, there were massive protests, hunger strikes, and complaints filed by human rights organizations. All kinds of articles and news stories were making an impact on public opinions to push these new regulations, such as some universities claiming that animal meat was essential to live, doctors claiming that protein from plants did not contain essential amino acids, malnutrition was on the rise, and even magazines publishing articles on the dark side of vegetables. There are theories that the virus itself may have been fabricated, possibly as a way to control overpopulation and poverty, which I personally think is the case here. This is supported in the novel through references to a zoologist who attempted to expose the truth and died under suspicious circumstances, as well as reports of global riots caused by overcrowding that were largely ignored by the media. Legalization came into play when governments gave into pressure from big money industries that had come to a halt. They adapted new processing plants and regulations, and soon after, they began to breed people as animals to supply the massive demand for meat. In this world, it is effectively illegal to even acknowledge the products as human. This change in language makes the reality feel less direct and less disturbing. It allows people to talk about what is happening without fully acknowledging it. And by using softer, more technical words, the system makes something horrific easier to digest and eventually easier to accept. And we'll see a common theme in the novel of language slowly changing to make it easier for people to live with what they're doing. Words like people, when referring to those being consumed, are replaced with terms like heads, and killing is referred to as processing. Our main character also recalls the early days of the crisis, when men in yellow protective suits moved through neighborhoods killing every animal they came across. Yes, including people's pets. Fear became so extreme that people avoided going outside without using umbrellas to protect themselves from lingering birds. Even media containing animals was banned, showing how far the fear had spread into everyday life, and how completely society had attempted to erase any reminder of the natural world. Many people withdrew completely from life, becoming depressed, dissociated, or even removing themselves from the world entirely. Chapter 10 provides a detailed view of the tannery, where our main character works, revealing how the processing system functions as a fully developed structure. At this point in the system, everything is tightly regulated and highly procedural. When new heads, aka humans, arrive, they are cleaned, inspected, and placed onto controlled feeding systems. Some are given liquid diets, and others eat what they call balanced feed. All heads are vaccinated and regularly given antibiotics to keep them healthy and suitable for processing. Any heads that show signs of illness are removed from the general population and placed into separate cages. If they recover, they are returned to the slaughter cycle, and if they do not, they are discarded. In theory, discarded material is reported to the Federal Security Authority, the FSA, which is responsible for collecting and processing it as waste, although, in practice, the system is not always consistently enforced. In many cases, it is instead fed to the scavengers operating at the margins of the system, a group that will be discussed later in more detail. The value of these heads is further determined through selective breeding, with first-generational pure specimens, also known as FGPs, considered more desirable due to the absence of growth hormones. This reduces human beings to controlled genetic stock, where worth is measured entirely through biological quality and market value. The facility runs through strict divisions of labor and clearly defined stages. One of the key steps is stunning, where the heads are knocked unconscious with a strike to the head. Inside the system, this is presented as a way to keep things efficient and improve the product quality, since the book repeatedly suggests that if the heads are stressed or frightened before death, the quality of their meat is considered to be tougher, which lowers its value. From there, the bodies are transported via mechanical rails into the slaughter and processing area. After slaughter, each of the bodies is placed into a loading container, which lifts it and drops it into a deherring machine. After all that, the blood is drained from their body. They then move into the final stages of the system, where the work is carried out by pairs of workers, operating in seamless rhythm. Their bodies are used to their entirety, with almost nothing going to waste, and the workers carefully separate each body part and place them onto labeled trays. Everything is washed, everything is inspected by supervisors, and then refrigerated. Our main character reflects on the workers as they carry out these repetitive tasks, wondering whether they ever stop to think about what they're actually handling, or whether they consider that this person was just alive moments ago. Once the different parts of the product are transported to their respective destinations, the industrial cycle at the tannery is complete. This sequence reinforces the idea that the system is not chaotic or hidden, but rather highly organized, procedural, and fully integrated into everyday economic life. We come to find out that every head has their vocal cords removed. They are naked, they are shaved, and every head in the center is marked with symbols burnt onto their skin each year to indicate their status and intended use. This is justified with the idea that meat doesn't talk, reinforcing the complete erasure of voice and identity. At one point in the book, there was a worker who would carve up the heads, but he began to change. He became increasingly quiet, he lost weight, developed dark bags under his eyes, and started pausing before cutting the carcasses. He also began to feel sick and missed work more frequently. Despite being asked repeatedly if he was okay, he gave no meaningful response. Eventually, one afternoon, he announced that he was going on a break. Without anyone noticing, he took a chainsaw and went to the resting cages where the heads were being kept. There, he began cutting the cages open. When workers tried to intervene, he threatened them with the chainsaw. A few heads managed to escape, but most remained in their cages. He screamed at them, insisting that they were not animals and that they needed to run because they were going to be killed. Some workers eventually managed to strike him with a club and knock him unconscious. His actions only delayed the slaughterhouse by a few hours, and the few heads that did escape did not get far and were quickly recaptured and returned to their cages. Most heads did not even attempt to flee at all, as they were described as so physically and mentally depleted that escape does not even occur to them as a possibility, much like an animal kept in a cage for so long that it no longer recognizes the concept of freedom and open space. So, scavengers in Tender is the Flesh are people who live entirely outside of the official system. They survive on the margins of society, often in extreme poverty, by collecting, stealing, or even salvaging whatever they can from a world that has become highly industrialized and strictly controlled. Because they are treated as outsiders and are almost invisible, Their lives are unstable, harsh, and defined by constant deprivation and hunger. Their presence reinforces the idea that even exclusion or resistance does not lead to freedom, but instead results in another form of suffering at the edges of the same system. There are many scavengers who simply linger outside the fence perimeter of the tannery, existing only in its shadows, waiting to be fed. Our main character is reminded by a commercial that plays in his mind. It shows a woman serving dinner to her family, saying, "I serve my family special food. It's the same meat as always, but tastier." This moment is deeply unsettling because it reflects how the system normalizes consumption. It presents a traditional family eating what is to be understood as human meat, reinforcing the idea that if an ordinary family accepts it, then it must be acceptable. It also hides the origin of the meat completely, reducing it to something anonymous and familiar. The language of tastier and special reframes the situation entirely, suggesting improvement and luxury rather than violence, turning something horrific into something desirable. During the book, our main character is going on a tour of another processing plant, and at the end of the tour they stop to see the workers barbecuing some kind of special meat. It is then revealed that the meat comes from a child, served as part of a celebration for a worker becoming a father. This moment is deeply unsettling, not because of the shock or secrecy, but because how normal it is treated. No one reacts with discomfort, and the act is framed as a reward rather than a violation. This highlights how completely the system has reshaped moral understanding, where even the most disturbing acts are absorbed into routine and celebration. Within this world, violence is not only industrialized, but expanded into culture, entertainment, and status. What becomes clear is that the system does not hide these practices, it just reorganizes them into acceptable forms, depending on context, legality, and wealth. We are introduced to Signor Urami, the boss of the tannery, who represents the system at its most detached and material-focused level. He is described in almost animalistic terms, with eel-like features and damp, glistening skin, reinforcing how unnatural and unsettling his presence is. However, what defines him more clearly is the way he speaks and thinks. He does not refer to people at all, only to numbers, materials, and processes. And under his authority, the tannery operates with complete emotional detachment. Urami's primary focus is skin. To him, it is not part of the human body, but a resource to be studied, improved, and sold. He experiments with chemicals and dyes, treating the skin the same way traditional industries would treat leather, even commenting that animal hides were once easier to work with. This comparison makes it clear that in his mind, there is no meaningful difference between human and animal materials anymore. His obsession becomes even more apparent through the collection of skin samples he keeps in a large folder, which he handles almost ceremonially. Each sample is categorized by texture, tone, and quality, with the whiter skin identified as the most valuable. This is not just a personal interest. It reflects a wider market where skin has become a luxury commodity. These samples are also used to train workers, reinforcing the idea that bodies are to be handled based on their material worth rather than any human significance. Human skin is also used in high fashion, where it is turned into luxury clothing and treated as valuable material. There are also rumors surrounding Urami that suggest that his behavior predates the system itself, including claims that he was involved in acts of violence and flaying before the transition. Whether these are true or not, they align closely with the role he now occupies. In his office hangs a reproduction of Michelangelo's The Last Judgment, a painting that includes the figure of Saint Bartholomew holding his own flayed skin. In its original context, the image represents suffering, judgment, and the separation of the soul from the body. The skin is empty, almost like a discarded shell, no longer tied to an identity or life. But placed in this setting, the meaning shifts. The image no longer represents spiritual transformation, but rather physical reduction. The idea that skin can be removed and held apart from the body mirrors exactly how the system operates. It reinforces the belief that what makes someone human can be stripped away, leaving only a usable outer layer. This is why skin becomes so important within the system. It is the most valuable and recognizable part of the body, something that once carried identity, race, and individuality. Skin is no longer a boundary between a person and the world, but just a product that can be graded, sold, and transformed into something else entirely. Through this, the novel suggests that the final stage of dehumanization is not just killing the body, but separating it from everything that once made it human, until even its surface becomes nothing more than material. We come to find out that even rural game reserves have been built where violence is turned into entertainment. Here, wealthy clients participate in organized hunts. The heads selected for these reserves are not random, they are carefully chosen based on physical ability. Strong, athletic men are more specifically marked and sold into these environments because they provide more of a challenge. Hunters proudly display their trophies openly, including preserved heads mounted on walls. These spaces are designed as leisure environments where violence is not only permitted but celebrated as a skill, sport, and achievement. This normalization extends even further into media and entertainment. In older televised formats, participants were rewarded for acts of violence against animals in front of live audiences, turning killing into spectacle and competition. Even when framed as entertainment, the structure remains the same. Suffering is converted into reward, and that is converted into public approval, which replaces moral judgment. At the same time, illegal and semi-legal markets operate alongside the official system. Human trafficking becomes a global industry moving through political, legal, and economic networks where corruption is widespread. High-value clients are able to bypass moral and legal restrictions entirely, paying for experiences that include consumption after sexual use. Consumption itself becomes a status symbol. In elite circles, eating human flesh is treated as a display of wealth and power, with specific individuals or body parts treated as luxury items. What is considered illegal in one context becomes acceptable in another, depending on money, influence, or privilege. While Marcus is visiting his sister, she prepares special meat for lunch while insisting that they don't eat people. Even her children casually joke about what Marcus might taste like, showing how deeply this mindset has been normalized across generations. What's really disturbing is how normal all of this has become inside ordinary homes. It's not just factories or hidden facilities anymore. Private households literally have access to heads as if they're just another domestic resource. In one home, there is a cold room with a head inside of it, treated like part of the household. Alongside it is a book called Death by 1,000 Cuts, which explains how to slowly remove and eat parts of the body while keeping the person alive for as long as possible. The idea is not just consumption, but prolonging it, cutting piece by piece so the meat stays fresh while the person continues to live through it. The presence of a hidden cold room in the kitchen further suggests that participation is not passive but intentional, as ordinary people seek to benefit from the system while maintaining the illusion that they are not doing anything wrong. It is no longer hidden or questioned, it is learned, shared, and treated almost like a method, which makes this normalization feel even more disturbing. Section 4 focuses on Marcos as a character and how he is shaped by the world around him, showing his contradictions, grief, and gradual emotional breakdown. Marcos' character reveals the psychological toll of living within the system, showing how constant exposure to violence creates deep internal contradictions. Before the transition, his father worked as a butcher, and Marcos worked for him before going on to study veterinary science, suggesting an attempt to move towards a more caring, life-preserving role. After the virus spread, his field of study quickly became obsolete, forcing him back into the very world he had tried to leave behind. However, as society adapted, so did he. Marcos did indulge in eating human meat, which shows how normal it had become to him. It's only after his child dies suddenly in his sleep that something shifts. The loss hits him hard and he stops eating special meat altogether. This choice doesn't come from some clear moral stance, but rather from grief. His wife can't cope with what happened either, and instead of facing it together, she leaves him and goes to live with her mother. That abandonment deepens his isolation and leaves him emotionally detached. At the same time, he earns a reputation as someone who is exceptionally good at his job, which creates a contradiction between what he does and what he feels. At one point, when he eats meat again, he is surprised to find it taste exquisite, and he realizes how much he has missed it. This moment highlights a clear double standard within him, where his moral discomfort does not fully stop his physical participation. This contradiction becomes even clearer in other moments, such as when he visits an abandoned zoo and finds a litter of puppies. He pets them, plays with them, and even gives them names, suggesting a lingering connection to the world where life still feels recognizable. On another visit to the zoo, which acts as a kind of emotional escape for him, the puppies are there again, but this time a group of teenagers are torturing them. Marcos is so disturbed by what he sees and cannot tolerate the suffering of the animals. Yet at the same time, he continues to witness and participate in the daily processing of humans without intervening. This really shows how selective his empathy has become, shaped by what society has taught him to recognize as acceptable suffering and what has trained him to ignore. We move on to, I would say, the most important part of the story, where a head is gifted to Marcos as compensation for another processing plant making a mistake with an order. At first, he does not know what to do with her and treats her as an unwanted burden, something forced into his life. She is left tied up in the barn and kept at a distance, more like an inconvenience than a person. Over time, however, his behavior changes. He starts feeding her, washing her, and even wondering about her basic comfort, such as whether she is cold or what she is doing when he is not there. Gradually, he allows her closer into his space, and eventually this develops into intimacy on his part. It is important to note, this head is a first-generational pure, meaning she was born and raised entirely in captivity and has no understanding of the outside world. Marcos then moves her from the barn into the house. He gives her a name, Jasmine, and eventually she becomes pregnant. And he teaches her how to behave in a more human-like way. He gives her an identity, although everything remains tightly controlled. Marcos often appears to be above others in the way he views the world, or at least he thinks he is. On one hand, he's disgusted by the system, but on the other, he begins to feel a sense of control and ownership over Jasmine, thinking to himself that he could do whatever he wants with her because she belongs to him. At one point, he even reflects that there is a kind of purity in her existence, partly because she is unable to speak or fully express herself. He studies her body in a detached way, tracing her shoulders, arms, hips, and legs, without truly touching her. He thinks she is beautiful, yet also believes her beauty is ultimately meaningless. Jasmine is constantly monitored through cameras and locked in the room when he is not present. She is treated in a childlike way, given crayons and television for stimulation, and even her basic bodily needs are controlled, as she is not allowed to use a toilet and must use a bucket instead. Over time, she begins to show signs of attachment, responding to Marcos physically and emotionally. Through Jasmine's pregnancy, his behavior begins to blur the line between care and control. He provides for her, ensures her safety, and appears to form an emotional attachment. And these actions resemble those of someone building a family, yet they exist within a system that denies her personhood entirely, and Marcos knows this. Even if he actually genuinely wanted to start a life with her, she would forever be branded physically and emotionally as nothing more than a product. His kindness does not challenge the system, but instead exists within it, making it so unsettling. The final act comes when Jasmine goes into labor. Marcos has already prepared for this moment by studying media and books, trying to avoid suspicion, since what he's doing is highly illegal and would result in his death, Jasmine's death, and the baby being taken away. This raises the question of what he ever truly intended to do, especially after months of behavior that seemed caring, including shared moments like dancing, picnics, and a relationship that appears almost affectionate. The shift comes suddenly and shockingly when Jasmine goes into labor. Marcos calls his estranged wife for help, and her reaction is immediate horror. While she is present, Marcos continues to comfort Jasmine, even kissing her and encouraging her through the process. However, once the baby is born, and Jasmine reaches out to hold it, Marcos makes a different decision. He kills Jasmine shortly after the birth. This moment exposes the full depth of his contradiction. Despite everything he has shown, his grief, his disgust, his hesitation, and his moments of caring, he ultimately acts in line with the system's logic. The decision does not feel random or sudden, but like the result of everything that's come before it. It shows that even someone who questions the system and experiences genuine emotion can still carry out its most extreme violence. His wife's reaction also reinforces this disturbing normalization. She questions why Jasmine was killed, suggesting that she could have been used to produce even more children. Through Marcos, the novel suggests that the greatest danger is not obvious cruelty, but adaptability. He is not presented as a monster, but as an ordinary person shaped by loss, environments, and survival. His contradictions highlight how easily moral boundaries collapse when violence becomes normalized, and how awareness of wrongdoing does not necessarily prevent participation in it. The last line in the book is when Marcos says, "She had the human look of a domesticated animal." He is revealing how completely his perception has been shaped by the system he lives in. The line suggests that Jasmine doesn't fit neatly into either category, human or object, in his mind. Instead, she exists in a blurred space where she looks human, but is mentally reduced to something owned or controlled, like livestock that has been tamed for use. It also shows that Marcos is no longer able to fully recognize her humanity in a clear or stable way. Even after everything they've shared, his language reflects the system's influence, where people are constantly reclassified as heads or products depending on their function. Calling her domesticated implies softness and familiarity, but it also carries the idea of ownership and control, suggesting that she was genuinely just there to be shaped and exist within his world. The system does not just change how people act, but how they see and understand other human beings. Throughout much of the book, I found the vividness of the writing made the world feel uncomfortably real, to a point where I had to put the book down multiple times. It's scary how normalized violence can become and how easily people can adapt to it. Ultimately, 10 Days of Flesh is not only about a dystopian system, but about how fragile moral boundaries really are when survival, profit, and normalization take over. And this leaves some uncomfortable questions. How much of ourselves do we lose when we accept something we know is wrong, but just keep doing it? And perhaps even more disturbingly, if society changed slowly enough, would we even notice ourselves becoming part of something we once would have called unthinkable? And that's where it ends.